Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canaligan. Welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Go get your coffee. But if you're like my guest and myself this evening, cheers. We have our drinks. Sit back and relax. Joining me today is a business owner, on-air personality, the host of We Are Live, St. Louis Live. You can also catch out National Bag Radio and Drinks with the Band. He's an animal welfare activist, an executive producer, a sales coordinator, and an events coordinator. Please welcome to the show, Chris Denman. Chris, my man, how are you?
Doing well, Tommy. I need to update my LinkedIn, don't I? That's what I need to do. I appreciate all that. No, thanks so much for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And cheers to you on that. We're recording on a Friday evening, so we decided to have a little cocktail for us in our show tonight.
Cheers, yeah, to Before the Lights, man.
Thank you. Let's go back. Farmington High School in Missouri, and you were a basketball player. We just talked off the air. It sounds like you're a hoops fan. What kind of player were you?
Oh man, I'm a guy who drastically wanted to be a point forward, who always got stuck playing the post in a school. Like, we weren't a tiny school. We had to play all the big St. Louis schools and private schools like that. At the time, it was 4A or 5A, whatever the biggest classification was. So, yeah, I mean, I could dunk and do the fun stuff, but I was slow, and I'm 6'3.5", maybe something like that. And you start getting into the college bound guys that are post players. It was fun, but yeah, point forward at heart during the AAU season, point forward. And I did all right with that, but yeah, I get stuck in the post a lot.
Did you get any kind of college interest at all?
Yeah, I'm a guy who would get like, I started some varsity, and it was fun, and it was like my life at the time, right? But it's the letters from the Baker universities of the world. The Lindenwood around St. Louis is like, you could be the hometown white dude, maybe be the walk-on guy. And then Hoop Dreams were made right 5 minutes from where I went to high school. So there's always the slot for the hometown walk-on, but those people have to work really hard. Even as a walk-on in college sports. I think it was fun, but I wasn't that great. And I think the best part about it was like when I figured out I could dunk when I was like 14 or 15, like if that would have just been the pinnacle, like that would be amazing. But AAU was a blast, but going on to work my tail off in college, like it didn't sound like it was something that I needed to do, but I don't know. Maybe I should have be in better shape now.
What was the original career goal? Was it what you're doing now?
No, podcasting wasn't a thing. And
well, I mean, were you looking to go into radio then, maybe?
Not even. No, Farmington's a lot of smart people. Like, believe it or not, a place like Farmington's like 20,000 people. It's an hour south of St. Louis. I'm really lucky to be raised by smart people. Like, my parents and grandparents are hardworking people that have, done what they wanted to do. So I definitely could have been encouraged to do anything. I was obsessed with, Dan Patrick and the heyday of the ESPN Sports Center crew, right? Love sports, obsessed with sports. But the few times I would take the high school courses, we had a TV channel at our school too. You could just, a student ran thing that you would just do. Could have done a ton of stuff, but I remember taking like a couple different classes. And it was probably, I was just too nervous at the time, but I was like, man, there are a lot of dorks in these classes. Like, this isn't very fun. Like, I could be doing something. When in reality, it was like, I was probably just too nervous to go talk in front of people a bunch, which is weird because I'll talk in front of anybody or a crew. But yeah, no plans for that. And I have a weird kind of route to getting into media, radio, all that good stuff.
So what was the original plan then? Go to college, get a degree doing, what were you looking to major in?
And I wasn't too sure, to be honest. My dad's in sales. I remember in high school doing the work program where it's, you go work somewhere, and my grandparents ran a bank, and finance was not for me. They were like, stick it out. You'd be great on the relationship building side for getting into, loans and all that stuff. And despite several family members like doing it's weird because like in a rural area, you'll have people that are bankers that are also incredibly sensible and like hardworking too. It's not like a Wall Street type of person. It's somebody who's literally in a boardroom and then like 10 hours later out like in a field working somewhere. But yeah, probably like finance at some point. I thought I'd be at a bank or like get into some sort of sales, which eventually led to that path. But I think it was a lot of I wasn't so sure, like sports, about sports management.
Sure.
I remember that degree getting kind of bandied about a little bit and thinking like, yeah, I could do that or something. And then, just didn't focus enough, I guess. I don't know.
That's me. I have the sports management degree. I actually have two of them. I have a bachelor and a master's in sports management.
Man. Well, I want to say, so this is a weird thing because I never even went there, but I went to a visit to Southeast Missouri State University, right? It's like an hour and a half south of where I grew up from. And we went, of all things, I was so pumped. A lot of kids from my school would go there. And I was like, yeah, I'll go to SEMO, like my dad, my grandpa. And I went, and we went to like a house party, where that somebody takes you, right?
Right.
And we looked around, and this is how big of a dip I was. They were like, me and my friend were like, I don't know. Are we the coolest guys here? Like, what's happening at this party? So I let one lame get together completely change that. And I didn't go to SEMO. But my point was, I feel like SEMO had a sports management degree or was looking at that. And I always found that to be super interesting. I don't know the path that most people take with that. Did you use yours?
I did. I was an athletic director, and at a junior college, I was a head basketball coach and head golf coach there for a while. I started out as the assistant. So I was there for like a dozen years. I was at Illinois Valley Community College. I grew up in central Illinois, so not too far from you in Missouri. And then after that, I started working for a company called Recruit Look, and we scout high school athletes and help them get scholarships. So I'm still using the sports management degree today, but way, way back in the day, I went to a place called National Broadcasting School and graduated from there and went into radio and had a mobile DJ business. So I've done the full spectrum, my man.
See, I love that because I didn't get into, so my first ever like media anything was just, I was a huge fan of podcasts starting in like 2009. And I was listening to those all the time, and I would pay attention, like working at a brewery at the time, and it was cool, but I was like, I don't want to do this forever, right? And I'll never forget just like paying attention to the podcast model, Adam Carolla's podcast model, right? And I'm like, okay, these guys are selling ads. That's why you do it. And I also listened to an AM radio sports station here in St. Louis, and like, it's the whole, like, if you don't make money, your show's not on the air. So I grasped that, which I eventually made it into sales. So I grasped that. I was 30 when we started our radio show, and it was an evening show on CBS Sports 920, which was ran by Inside STL at the time. And that was my super weird route to, like, I had a sales background, and that was going fine. But I was just like, I bet I could sell ads if I told people that we had this cool idea and we were on a CBS affiliate. That's how I kind of got it going.
Let me ask you this then. Who do you admire, or who that helped you with your career to get into this field?
A lot of different people, like, just to be kind of generic or cheesy, like my parents and grandparents are wildly supportive. That's huge, right? Like, that does a lot for people. But like, if we want to go just like, hey, did somebody talk to you or anything like that? I mentioned him, and I don't align with every single thing he says. He'll try and piss people off on Twitter quite a bit. But Adam Carolla and his manager were really unnecessarily nice to me. And I just say that because I'd been doing radio like 6 months, and we had already had Adam on as a guest, and like we ended up doing this live show with him. And I've told the story a few times, but they would take my calls, and I would ask them a lot of business questions and a lot of, did you do this or that? Is this? And I think about it now, and I'm like, boy, was I using those cell phone numbers. I was polite, and I would ask permission, send the emails and all that. But
right.
Like, you don't get that right away. Like, they legitimately like would make time to talk to me here and there. They probably don't even remember it. And they would make time to talk to me. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this or I'm doing that. Like, would you suggest this? And I guess, made a decent enough impression on them from that live show we did that they'd take my call and give me unique advice that 1,000,000% saved me from a few very poor decisions, thinking you're bigger than you are, kind of get a little steam,
That's cool. So on the heels of that, what can you offer advice to people who are listening to this that are thinking about, hey, these two guys are doing a podcast, I'll go do one. What do you throw out?
I say, well, do it. Number one, like come up with some kind of a consistent schedule. Like it starts off super basic. Like my friend and I wanted to do a podcast, and I was like, we're over 30. I don't have time. No one's going to buy ads on our stupid living room radio show that we had no tech knowledge or anything. Like you have a background, like you have a beautiful setup, sounds great. And I would probably argue like the tech's a lot better now too, as far as just like the gap. But I would totally say if you want to do it, like come up with some sort of consistent schedule and just enjoy it. Like I tell people that all the time. So we went from starting a silly little evening radio show to we have a small media company now and we've got a podcast studio and all that stuff. So I work with a lot of people that are either thinking about getting into podcasting or whatever. So the first thing I'm saying is like, number one, enjoy it, right? Don't do this if this is going to be just like, I'm going to be a podcaster, because you're probably not. Like you're probably not going to have any success or make any money with it. But if you love it and you're willing to put in some consistency to it and you pay attention to it and you're, again, serving that creative fire that you have, like I can help you figure out how to get some small sponsors, because people like backing people's ideas, dreams, whatever. And then if you're putting that consistent effort out there, I think you can develop a small base, and then maybe you catch a couple breaks, but be ready for either really, 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 really love it, or if you're trying to make money, work really, 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 really hard.
I would agree with that. And it's funny that you say you had a sales background, because you need that in this field for sure, along with marketing and everything else. So if you're going to school for business and you have marketing and management and sales, it's going to help you in this field.
You have to now too. I've over the pandemic, and I'm hopping around a little bit here, but like I've talked to so many musicians. Like traditionally, like I kind of just try and talk to comics. Like that's what I love. I love comedy. I love, getting behind the scenes on that. But I've always talked to musicians and stuff too. But I've talked to way more through the pandemic, thanks to that Drinks with the Band show you're talking about. And they're not like, I used to make fun of musicians outside of our mutual interviewee, Ben from Lucero, who I interviewed a few years back. Like, I interviewed Kevin Bacon and he was in a band, but like, I didn't talk to a ton of musicians. I kind of wrote them off as flakes, other than local musicians that I just thought were cool people. But like musicians, like I'm laughing, like these people have to be media trained now. Just because you're a good singer doesn't mean that you can MC something or even have a normal conversation. So if you're going to do this 1000%, like I think people, so we have the University of Missouri here, right? Mm-hmm. Huge journalism school, and a guy named Tim McKernan, he does the morning after here, wildly successful on an AM radio scale, podcast scale, whatever. He's done really great for himself. And he went to Mizzou and he was like, I sure wish that they would have told me nothing matters if you don't have advertising behind you. And it's true, especially if you're working for someone else. Like you see the radio business turnover. Mm-hmm. And if there's consistency, that means that either you've gotten lucky and that weird ratings scale they use favors you, so then they can sell that well, or you're selling stuff yourself, right? Like it's
correct.
From what I see from someone who did not go to journalism school whatsoever, I was around a lot of people that are no longer in that field. Like you kind of need to tell kids that it would probably run a lot of people out of even going into it, right?
I would agree with that.
That's why they hold back. Yeah, because sales is not easy.
No, it's not. And it's never ending, especially, in the podcast industry, constantly looking for, the next sponsor, because they don't stay forever. Like some people think, hey, if I get one sponsor, they're with me forever. They might be with you for 2-3 shows and you're like, okay, who's next? And
sometimes it's not even a matter, like, okay, you have the talent. Great. Like you see with TV shows, like how many great TV shows get canceled? That's not because, maybe it's because somebody's a jerk and doesn't like a star or something, but it's a money thing or a ratings thing or something like that. So it's very tied into that.
Speak to me regarding St. Louis Live. How did that all transpire for you?
So moved on since St. Louis Live. So that was our morning radio show. I was always saying I need to update this stuff. So started our evening radio show, got moved into afternoon drive fairly quickly, like less than a year doing radio, which is awesome. Moved over, got a morning opportunity, did St. Louis Live, but basically it came through that just kind of I'll take it back to the sales background. Is like why it happened is because I was literally hosting the show and then also having conversations, bringing in new folks. But that whole endeavor that has now led to this and getting to do more like events and things like that. We work with so many cool people at my business now that it wouldn't have been possible from St. Louis Live. We have some comedians that we produce their shows, and I'm on those shows as well. I met them interviewing them for St. Louis Live. Or We Are Live on the radio. So it's what got me there was definitely just the the grind of sales and forming good relationships with the people that you interview, right? Like
correct.
The comics that would come through, not all, like I'm sure there's some great interviews, but a lot of them were just kind of not feeling the radio style interviews. And they'd come by and have a good time. And, you know, it's like, hey, well, we do events and things like that too. So we keep in touch and then you get to work with a few of them down the line. So,
and the reason I brought that up in knowing where you are today, is I wanted to see how that grassroots foundation from being at St. Louis Live has connected and helped you grow to where you're at today. And it sounds like you took a lot of those networking pieces that you were using early on in St. Louis Live to get where you're going now.
Yeah, and that's important because there's a way and a time and a place to ask people for things, to be there for people. Like you never want to interview somebody that you know, maybe you don't have any business interviewing, and then be like, hey, can I do this thing? Can you do this thing for me? Right? Can you shout me out? Can you do that? No, and it doesn't even need to be calculated. It's about that great interview, and then 4 years later, Sherry Shepard, who we do a show with now, she was on The View for like 7 years, texts me and is like, hey, you're still doing you guys still have the media company? Yeah. She's like, me and my friend Kim Whitley, she was in Friday Part 2. She's in all these TV shows. Like, we want to do this podcast now that either way. Then they hit you up, they trust you, and you're working together. And all of a sudden our 40th episode of Two Funny Mamas is this week. And that's strictly from a great interview, being nice to someone and not expecting anything to come of it, really. But still, you know, being there for people. So yep. That's a really cool lesson to learn.
I call it the chain link fence. You have to continue to put up the next section of fence, and sooner or later, you'll get it all the way around. But it's a lot bigger than you think. It's not just, hey, I got 10 sections and I can close it out. No. You got to keep going, man.
No, and that I tell that to people all the time, and I'm so lucky to get to be like in that show in particular. I'm so lucky to get to be a voice on that. These two women have worked so hard. They've got all these credits, but guess what? They still need help, and they still are taking on new jobs. When I say daily and weekly, like Kim just picked up a hosting gig on it's like Pop Daily on E! channel. This woman was just in an Adam Sandler movie. Like, what? So anybody listening that wants to do that, like, it doesn't stop. And I'm sure that's the same for business, sports, music. You got to keep taking things on and find that balance.
Chris, how do you juggle all the different things you're doing? And not only juggle it, but give it the dedication and time each position deserves?
Great question. Great question, because you will find yourself spinning out and not being creative, not being yourself. Personally, I would love to spend more time like taking chances with ideas and like writing scripts with people and, hey, maybe we'll take a fly on this. You got to take the opportunities that still satisfy you creatively, that also bring in revenue, that you're part of it. If you're part of a company, it's called Midcoast Media. We do a bunch of different stuff. So I got better at that about a year ago, as far as parsing things out and just being more aware. I think just the goal of wanting to have freedom and to be able to take bigger swings, and then also just coming to terms with if this is what you want to do, you're going to have to build and build and build. So yeah, you really have to take a deep breath, and sometimes you have to say no to things, and definitely if something's not working, it's not always going to fix itself either. Right. So making some tough changes can help with that process. So
how important is collaborations for you?
Incredibly important. Oh my gosh. Man, if you're like a host or a talent, like, I don't know. So I mentioned Sherry and Kim. I'll drop some more names. I get to work with this comic, Greg Fitzsimmons, if you know him. Super funny, regular on Howard Stern. And then Mike Gibbons, he's like a showrunner. He's helped co-create Tosh.0. So I would get to work with them every week. And then I work with Sherry and Kim. By all accounts, these people are stars, right? So I see the way they treat people, and I saw the way Adam Carolla treated me backstage at a 2,000 person live show. I see the way Sinbad treated me when he came in here for an interview a few times, all that stuff. Like, take note of the successful people and emulate them without completely copying. But my point is if those people need teams and need help, like, take a step back and evaluate what's around you and say, like, who could help me and how can I help them back? So that's incredibly important. And whether that's, just kind of realizing that you're working with someone who's not collaborating that well, or just seeking new people that want the same things, like, that's so important. And it's tough. Like, I don't know if it's because I have like a German background or whatever, but I've been known to just kind of, I'll figure it out and then plow through. And then you're, on hour, 16 of your day, nothing's gotten done efficiently. And you're and you dig yourself a hole. And that can happen over years too. We're not talking days, weeks, all that. So collaboration, to answer your question, wildly important and impossible. Like, I my point with bringing up those names was, like, I see, like I mentioned it, I see how they treat me, all that, but like, I can't imagine working with someone who thought they didn't need other people. Like, that would be scary.
Yeah, I agree.
You just wouldn't work with them.
Yeah.
Right?
I wouldn't have a show if it wasn't for collaborations. For sure. I'd have no show.
What do you, and I'll try not to go too much counter interview, but you're an interesting guy. Like, I checked out your show. Like, what do you most, is it the conversations that you're having, and it's just, you're staying open to helping other people? Like, what's that for you? That's interesting to me, because you do have a really unique background.
I do. For me, this whole thing started with, I couldn't find what I'm doing as a podcast on a podcast. You probably remember the old behind the scenes VH1 days. And that's kind of where this whole thing happened, because for me, it was, everybody talks about what they're doing these days on an interview, but nobody goes to the start of it and talks about the journey and the road they've taken to where they're at. And that's always intrigued me. So I'm like, well, if nobody's going to do it, I'll do it. And that's kind of where this whole thing started.
Like, from a 30,000 foot view, your guest list reflects that. Who the hell has on Raleigh Fingers and Ben from Lucero? Yeah. like, come on. Yeah, and then, that's awesome.
And then when I started that, it was, as you well know, and if listeners that are paying attention out there, I call it the branches and the fingers of the show. If I just went to sports, I limit myself to that field. But by going to sports, music, entertainment, stuff that's value and true and to my heart, now I've made more branches and fingers, and that can continue to grow like a tree, and it gets endless in where I can take each individual platform. Having you on the show is on the entertainment side. We got a sports background. We got music. So we're covering all three branches. Had I just done sports, you and I may not be having this conversation. So it's those collaborations, and it's getting the people on that will talk to me about their road. And not everybody's willing to do that, because there's things that either they don't want to talk about in the past, or there's some things that they just are afraid to talk about. So I get that when I have some guests just say, I'd like to, but I got to pass.
Yeah. And that's fair. And that's something too. Like, if we're talking to like people wanting to learn, like, don't make it about you every time. I just, like, I love these reminders. There's an artist, I'm not saying anything out of turn here. I'll drop his name, Nathaniel Rateliff. He's a Missouri guy. And I was like, hey, do you want to close out our finals, or our second season? Say final, we're doing season 3, our second season of Drinks with the Band. And his manager was really nice, and they're really complimentary. And then they got back to me like, hey, some stuff going on. Let's link up down the road. Now you have a choice there. You can send a snarky, like, okay, back to the manager. You can pout, not respond, anything, like, do whatever you want to do. But then you're going to feel really stupid when 6 days later, around the date you were asking for, he's the musical guest on Saturday Night Live. So, like, you're not above SNL, Chris. Right. Like, but apply that like all the time, because it's time. Do they get to go hang out with their kids? Do they have a show? Are they literally going to fall asleep middle of the thing? Because you don't know what's going on with people. So, but back to like your show style, everything like that. I wanted to say something because I have a similar mindset, and we were on a sports station, and thank God they were cool to just let us do whatever we wanted. Because we talked to a lot of sports people then, but it was a 3-hour evening show. You can only talk about, at the time, you got a lot of time to fill defensive metrics for however long. I'm like, I need to talk to a comic. Like, I'm not here for, breaking down who the Blues might want in the off season. So I think the way your brain and my brain's probably similar. Like, the way you have your show laid out makes sense to me, but I think on the other side, people have to find that lane. Like, the way you have yours, it's so unique in your guest list, at least. And then just talking to you a little bit, that's probably the only thing that makes sense in your head, right? Like, that's how I feel at times. And when people try and get you to be like, well, you should do a little more button up, I'm like, I'll probably just do what I'm seeing in my head, because it's a creative endeavor. If I, want to just sell something, I can go to tech or something like that. Right? Yeah.
I get asked all the time, you need to talk more on your show. I'm like, the show's not about me. The show's about my guest. If you want to hear about me, then when I get on another podcast, I'll let you know when I'm on that show and you can listen to me. This show is about my guest. This show is not about me as the host.
Will, and you know what? I literally, as I was listening to your Larry Hughes interview, just to check you out, I take pride in that, man. I learned that on the radio because I was always so excited and I wanted to talk, and I was like, jump in. I'm like, no, I want to make this point. I had to start covering my mouth. To get better at it, because I was so embarrassed at how much I was interrupting or jumping on people. You did to that point, there's a major thing I noticed. I was like, oh, he just lets him go. So yes, compliment to you.
Thank you very much. Back to you. Where did the idea originate and you're a co-founder of We Are Live. How did that whole thing start?
So We Are Live started as an evening radio show it was a podcast. Like, we took a podcast mentality, but we needed the ability to sell advertising. My still good friend doesn't co-host the show anymore. His name's Travis Terrell. Myself and him worked at a brewery together, and it was just like classic buddy stuff where, you're just roasting each other all the time. Both of us super interested in entertainment and comedy. And he had moved to St. Louis after whatever. We knew each other in Columbia, Missouri, and he moves to St. Louis, and he's like, hey, yeah, we should look at this podcast thing. And it started there. It literally started there. We went, neither of us had, he probably did some media stuff because he went to Mizzou. It started with us just kind of like, well, we make people laugh when we're around each other, and we'll look into this. And Travis and I just started kind of writing down potential guests. And I was so obsessed with podcasts at the time that I just wanted to find a way to make it work. And we literally started like looking into it, right? Like, hey, what's it cost to have that time slot that always rotates out, that everyone, their show lasts like a month on, from 7 to 10 on AM radio at night in St. Louis. And we started looking into that, and the station the group was cool and helped us a little bit. And we started going, I lived in downtown St. Louis. They have this really nice media center. We would go practice. We would go do practice shows for like 2 weeks and be like, is this going to be like embarrassing? Or our parents going to be like, So that's how it got started. Just like two guys that were super like we crack people up or whatever, just being silly, but we had the similar shared interests in entertainment and sports and all that good stuff. And we're like, let's give it a go. So that's kind of how it got started. But I think it worked because we did kind of have aspirations. He's still trying to like get some writing stuff done. He did a fellowship with Sesame Street for like writing and stuff like that. And we created a roast show where like we're the hosts and stuff. So we didn't just want to do radio. We both kind of had some entertainment aspirations. So that's how it got started. We had a blast with it and got a lot of, I think the somewhat quick feedback of people enjoying it, like kind of just gave us legs, you know?
That's good. How important is social media then to your guys' success and growth?
Man, it's so important now. And I'm lucky now. One of my business partners has a publicity background, has worked with like really big names and has done big campaigns and corporate PR and stuff. And that's something we do. Like we help like bigger names build their YouTube channel, make sure they're staying busy on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter. I'm no expert by any means, but absolutely it's helped us a ton. The first ever instance, we're doing that radio show and we have on a friend of ours that played football for Mizzou during the Mizzou protests, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. There was a hunger strike and all this stuff. So we have on Lorenzo Williams. He played a little bit with Ravens in the NFL, but he was an All-American at Mizzou, defensive tackle. We have this conversation, and it's my co-host who's black, went to Mizzou, and Lorenzo, who's black, played football at Mizzou. We just talked like we would sit down at a bar, and we talked on our radio show. I tweeted it out, hashtagged it, Mizzou, check out this interview with my good pal Lorenzo, whatever. A reporter from the New York Times emails me and he's like, hey, listen to your show. That was super unique. That was great. It was like just a conversation and everybody's usually screaming at each other about all this. And I was like, oh yeah, that's, what we do. And then it led to them doing, you can look it up. They did a piece on Pinkle, but a part of that blurb was Lorenzo, and it was directly from us doing the radio show. So to me, I was like, we kind of made the New York Times, right? To a degree. It was awesome. But that was from a tweet when we had 50 followers or something like that. So super important, and especially video now. And now that this pandemic has forced everyone, like this tech's been around a while. And like people are like, ooh, Zoom or this or that. Streaming is so interesting and so useful. And if you have a good creative show or product or whatever, people will tune in and enjoy it. I'm not perfect with my social media stuff, but we do work hard as far as just like trying to put out clips and all these things. And it's really interesting to me to see the change over the last year, because people were forced to, I guess we'll look at this or do a digital event, and they shouldn't be considered the same thing. But I think there's a lot more respect for podcasts, live streaming, and just virtual type things, because literally like you see the graphics and stuff people use on their shows, like it's not that much different than what ESPN's using, right? So it's like you're already kind of tuned into this stuff. Don't get me wrong, there's variances in quality, but social media, huge part of growth.
Drinks with the band, your idea, somebody else's?
Yeah, that was mine and our company's, I guess. Like it was collaborative, right? Like we're talking about that. So I co-own the company with two other folks. They're both creative and in that. And the people at Jack Daniel's, man, they support us and we were already working on stuff, and they're synonymous with music. And I was like, I've got this idea and I think we could do it. We'll kind of apply this. And their U.S. ambassadors, a guy named E.T., he's got his own show that just launched, Rock on the Rocks. He does it with me, and he does a cocktail demo. We talk. Can you imagine how interesting you have to be the guy for Jack Daniel's? Like that's what an iconic brand to be like, yeah, I'm the guy. So I do that with him. And then I had some ideas, and I'm into music, but again, too, we've done so much comedy stuff. I was a little apprehensive, and I became friends with a girl named Katie Tupin, who also, she's a musician. She was in a band called Houndmouth. She's been on Letterman a couple times. Like she's done some really cool stuff, and she's only 30. And we became friends, and I had her on a previous show, and I was like, hey, I want you to be on the show, but maybe you can introduce me to some people too, right? And because she had been on the show and had a good time just chatting before, she was comfortable, making that ask to people or saying like, hey, you're bored. Do you want to jump on the show? And season 1 went really well. It was super fun. I feel like we've gotten way better with the tech. Like, you learn a lot about, it's not just a mic and a camera, like compression and guitars and interfaces and all this stuff. And it's been fun. It hasn't been perfect along the way, but yeah, we're closing out season 2 and we'll do a season 3. I can't say who, but I just got a really confirmation of a really, I'll tell you off the record.
Off the record.
But no, I'm a weird guy. Like, I'm talking about Adam Carolla helping out and being cool. Like, I loved that guy. I was 12 listening to Loveline, right? So
I remember that.
I'm always like, yeah, right. And like Lucero, one of my favorite bands. If my 2 favorite people are like Brad Pitt, who's a Missouri guy, and Van Halen, you're probably not going to interview those people. Like, you're not going to get to do that. So I think it's worked because all of these bands are accomplished and touring, and then we mix in some talented St. Louis people too. But they're the bands that might have a Grammy, but are still like grinding it out in a theater or grinding out in a packed 300-person venue. So I've been really excited to meet and talk with those people too, because they've got some great stories and it's really fun, man. I enjoy it.
It's a great idea. I mean, you've given yourself permission to drink on the air, to drink at work, to bring in Jack Daniels. You can't tell the main man at Jack Daniels, nah, I'm not going to have a cocktail at work when my show's called Drinks with the Band. I mean, it's originative. It's fun. You do a great job with it. And I'm sure 95% of the people watching have to have drinks in their hand. So everybody's just kind of chilling and having a drink and listening to some music.
It's cool too. And I think it's so funny because if you do get, like, let's say we have, we kicked off season 2 with a guy named Brian Fallon, and he was the lead singer of I think they're just on hiatus, of a band called the Gaslight Anthem. They're a band that's like toured the world. Again, I always like using Letterman as a, they've done Letterman or the Tonight Show or whatever. So when you get a bigger name, sometimes you'll get people that are a little pissy with you. And they're like, we want songs, why are you talking so much? But I love that part because like, those guys, like, even though there's a lot of good content out there, like having a Ben from Lucero on, or having this band called the War and Treaty, or one of my favorites is Ron Gallo or Womack from Future Birds. These guys and gals come on and they get to actually talk and express themselves, but you also see the performance. So I don't know, it's a nice balance. And I like to think that we keep getting really awesome people on because there is a little bit of like, it's fun. It's a fun time. Like, that's the part I pride myself on, is that no one's like, they're not hitting the brakes too much.
With this concept, what are some of the roadblocks that you're watching out for us to try to avoid?
Out of touch management.
Okay.
Yeah. Like,
that's a good one, actually.
It is, because don't engage. Like, if they want to like pull a thing where they're like, my client makes this much money, and they're lying, like, that's fine. That's good for them. I'm awesome. If somebody gives that to you, that's great. If it's something like, that's a huge one. Like, if they're that, or if somebody's talks down to you, like, let them talk down to you. This isn't email. This is not, you're not nose to nose. This is not a big deal. I think that's important. And being comfortable, not like, here's some things that are weird that I try. Like, I don't tell them what songs to play. Like, I love these bands. If I gave Ben a set list, like, I'm going to be going from like years of seeing his shows. I don't know what he wants to play. I don't know what he remembers, all that stuff. And to them, that might make it tedious, right? I don't tell them what to play. If they ask, I would be like, well, I'm a fan, you play this. But that's another thing, like, chill out. Let the artist enjoy themselves. Don't, like you're saying, it's about the guest. I try my hardest to say, like, if you don't mind, or if this, like, I try and keep it fairly loose, and everything's just kind of worked so far. So it's been nice. What's
a typical day like for you, Chris? Because I'm sure it ain't 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
So here's what I have to keep repeating. I'm so lucky to be busy during this time, right? And I mean that. I work 7 days a week. I'm not married. I don't have kids. So what the like right,
we're in the same boat.
And you have such a great audio podcast. We have our video system set up so we can see each other. So I'm trying not to like do too much. We're like, you hear me, buddy? Like pointing at myself and stuff like, because I'm like, nobody's gonna know what we're talking about. So no, okay, so a day to me, again, I'm so lucky to I have great business partners. We're all owner operators. We're all putting in time. The people that work with us, engineers, they bust their tails. They do great creative work. It's awesome. But I've tried to be better about not doing the Midwest thing where I get up at 5 and come in and just, you find yourself like, if you're here for more than 12 hours and you're not like on camera or something, you're probably better off. I have 2 dogs, like walking my dogs or working on something from my house at least for a little bit, because I live pretty close. Our studio's cool. Like it's a fun, creative space. Like always something to be done. Always something to be done. So a typical day, I'll wake up. I've been making myself eat breakfast. Because you're like,
check.
We have a great coffee sponsor, and I just like plow through gourmet coffee all day, and you just work and work and work, and then all of a sudden you're like, I've been at a computer for 2 hours, and I don't think I got done what I need to get done. So I have a unique thing. I do things that we would both call like talent, right? Like if it wasn't a pandemic, I would be hosting events, running comedy series, coming up with creative endeavors, but also running them, right? So along with kind of hosting shows and creative production on shows, I'm in charge of all our relationships. Also, I'm working with a music festival. I'm in charge of the relationships for that. Podcasts, I'm kind of the point person on that, right? Like, hey, talk to me. I'll get you going with the engineer. We have a schedule for that. So I'm running a studio, making sure our current partners, and when I say partners, like advertising partners, project partners, things like that, making sure that's running all right, making sure our studio lead is good to go, because people expect us to help them with their podcasts and things like that. And that's important. They have advertisers. We partner with a dietitian. She was just on, I can't remember. It's a Nike podcast. I can't remember what it's called. She's doing huge things. I'm in charge of all the partnerships for her, creating events with her, and she's a hard worker. So I'm leaving a little bit out, but it's basically functioning as a relationship point person. And then when I'm lucky, I get to do my creative stuff, because like that's the best part, right? Like, but what I'll find is you gotta hit the brakes sometimes, because I truly enjoy talking to people. I really love getting to know people, finding out something interesting. And if I'm super tired and just beaten down by the world, it's not a good show. And it's not, nobody wants to watch that.
I can understand where you're coming from there. For sure.
You feel it in your bones.
I feel it, yeah. Chris, what do you feel the pandemic has made permanent changes in your industry?
Great question. I was talking about this earlier. On-premise activities, your festivals, sporting events, things like that. Podcasts and virtual events and live streaming, there's a new respect for it. It's super difficult. If there's a live stream, like award show, that's another thing we do. We produce like virtual events for people. Like we have a production team. So there's a new respect and an awareness to those capabilities, because you can't deny that people are seeing it. And it's like, well, what the hell's a road sign, right? Like impressions, right? Like it's traffic count. You're like, well, does it directly correlate to sales? Maybe. Like I haven't been pitched on a billboard before, but if a billboard salesman and I had a conversation, like it would probably get pretty uncomfortable, the amount of questions I would ask that person. So I think the streaming stuff, podcasts are more relevant. But yeah, for industry as a whole, like I think if you just want to wrap it up, simplify it, people will at worst understand and maybe take stuff a little more serious. about the potential. I say that like doesn't mean if I say we're doing an award show and I pop up my phone and hit Facebook Live and you and I are like, well, here we are. Like nobody wants to watch that. Right. So I'm hoping that that the relevance sticks around and the capabilities are there.
If you could witness any event, past, present, or future, what would it be? And while you're maybe spinning, I'll tell you what mine is. Woodstock.
That's such a good answer, and I swear I'm trying my best not to just like do the plugs for everything. But ET, who co-hosts with me, he has this other podcast that we're working with him on. He had on Henry Diltz. He is the photographer from all those iconic photos at Woodstock.
No way.
I'm serious. Yeah. And then he's talked to these guys that have been around Hendrix. So you just nailed it because there is a reverence for that moment. And then the music that was involved there, it doesn't feel real. It's all a movie. And it's, it's been Hollywooded up all over, but great answer. Yeah. Wow. As you say, think about it. I'm like, well, let's talk about your answer.
Well, I actually have a 3 LP vinyl of Woodstock that was recorded live on a defunct label. And it is unbelievable. You can hear the rain chants. They're making announcements about the line is so many miles down the road. It's insane. Right. This vinyl I have of Woodstock.
That was a time where there's no, you're just there. You're not live streaming it. You're there.
Right.
You're, if you go to a music festival now, half the people have their phones out. They're trying to put it on their Instagram. They're doing that. I get it. I'm not downing it, but that's what they do. You're just there. There's no cell phones. You're in the moment, and maybe you escape with some LSD. That's good. I don't know, but holy cow, what a moment, man. Of anything. Wow. I'm trying to think of something historical, just because it would be really interesting to see kind of how people treated each other. We'll say 1,000 years ago. I can't pinpoint one thing, but it would be interesting it would probably be depressing. And that's maybe a bad choice because I think we would see, wow, people are not much different. It's been a really long time. Just because we have cell phones doesn't mean we're not just absolute terrors to each other. But you know what? I just watched The Last Dance. I'm 36. I was obsessed with Jordan growing up, and despite being cognizant for David Freeze's walk-off stuff with the Cardinals, man, can you imagine being there for Jordan's first championship or being there for that? I got really, really just it felt great watching that Last Dance. So just for a fun answer that wouldn't be damning, I'll go with that. Either that or aliens addressing the world for the first time.
We got both ends of the spectrum there.
Hey, we got to keep it mixed up, man. Can't just go one lane.
How can listeners connect with you?
Hit me up. My personal Instagram at InstaDenman. Or at We Are Live Radio on Instagram. Facebook's where we do drinks with the band, facebook.com/We Are Live Radio. That's every Wednesday at 8 Central. We've got some really cool, at the time of this recording, we got a band called The Minks coming on. Sadler Vaden plays guitar. He's a great solo artist, but he's in the 400 unit with Jason Isbell. And you're going to want to see the closer too for this season. So
off the record.
Off the record.
Off the record. Chris, thanks for taking time out of your crazy busy schedule and coming on my show Before the Lights. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it. And I promise to give you a venue to come spill some tea to me, sir. It'll be fun.
That will be fun. For show notes, go to the website, beforethelightspod.com. I will have links so you can get hooked up with Drinks with the Band, Chris's Instagram, and much more. Follow me on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. You want Before the Lights merch? I got it for you. Go to beforethelightspod.com/merch. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, a salute, a chin chin.